Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Only Ways Ethics Digital Health Podcast. And I'd like to introduce you all to our guest, Kimberley Dawson. I've known Kimberley for a while now, and we both we're both on the CSO Coffee and Chat on a regular basis. And we've met on a few occasions. But what I'll do, hi Kimberley. I'll give you the opportunity to tell everyone about your role and your journey in digital health.
Yes, thank you, Dean, and thank you for inviting me today. And hello to everybody listening. My name's Kimberley. I am a senior digital clinical safety officer and have been full-time for the last 18 months. And before that, I was doing this role on top of my digital specialist nurse role part-time. Or should I say, adding it in to my full-time job and making sure that clinical digital safety was taking the right path, as you would. And before I became a clinical digital safety officer, and before I was a digital specialist nurse, my background is that I've registered adult. So I have past experience within critical care, cardiothoracic surgery and transplantation, specialising in ECMO, and then moved on to pre-assessment in the private sector before coming and joining my journey here.
That's great. Thank you for that, Kimberley. So you've had quite a varied experience there. So predominantly sort of that surgical based experience. Really interesting you saying about you were digital clinical nurse prior to becoming full-time as a clinical safety officer. And that leads me on to we both met at Rewired. And I know that you I was really keen to go and see you doing your talk with the NHS England guys around why clinical safety is everyone's job, and talking around that. So it'd be really interesting to get your sort of just your views on that and your take, especially with that transition from going from that clinical digital nurse, where you've just alluded to the fact that you had to fit the clinical safety bit into your role, and then all of a sudden becoming a clinical safety officer. And from that perspective of when we say it's everyone's job, how that fits into that team in relation to
that. So when I was a digital specialist nurse, I obviously had my own projects ongoing, which was taking up obviously a chunk of my time of making sure that actually from an electronic patient record point of view, that my items that I was needing to do were being done. But then also the ask was, as I very silly said, I don't have enough work to do, please could I have more? Obviously not realising of where that would lead to quite so much.
The poison chalice.
Yes, very much so, of like, oh, well, actually, we've got plenty of work that you can do in the role of clinical digital safety. Here, go on this study day, and then, believe it or not, you're a fully fledged CSO and crack on. So it's very much like, oh, okay then. But then what happened in some ways is that when you work in a team of digital specialist nurses and you're all working within your own work streams, is that then I was then coming in of like, but I need to know about your work stream. I need to know about your work stream. Oh, and then there's this that's going on outside of EPR that I also need to know about, because I know I need to do the clinical digital safety for that also. But what I've always enjoyed about this role is that it's the investigation bit of it, of that you're piecing together little bits of information from here, there, and everywhere, and building it into a picture to help not just the clinicians that are using it at the front, but also the clinical digital team that you're working with, the patient safety team, project managers, etc. And that's why I come in with of why clinical digital safety is everybody's responsibility. And, as nurses, we're very much a case of patient safety is down to you and what it is that you do. You need to make sure that you're competent, that you've got the confidence to do it, and also that you can then speak up and advocate for your patients. Clinical digital safety is no different in my eyes. It's very much, we work hand in hand with patient safety. Of our end goal is to make sure that our patients are looked after, that they do not come to harm. But if unfortunately that does occur, that we learn from that and we move forward and make changes and we mitigate what's happening to them to make sure that when the next patient comes in, that same instance does not happen again, or that we've managed to mitigate it enough where actually we can inform the patient that this harm could happen and to what level it could happen, and do they agree with that or not. And it, to me, the patient is the end goal. Their satisfaction, their journey, their health, they are a whole package, which is why I would hope in some ways that as soon as a staff member comes through the door, whether that's at university, at the hospital, college, etc., and they want to do health and social care as a job role, as a course, that they are aware that there are ways to flag incidences. There is a clinical safety officer that works in the trust. You can contact me at any time and we will have those discussions together.
That's great, and we're going to be touching on those points sort of like later on in some of the sort of like questions that have come up. It's really interesting you talking about the patient safety side of things and the patient safety team that you said, you know, working hand in hand with patient safety, and that whole investigative approach in relation to clinical risk management, which I'm a big advocate for. We only just mentioned in the last episode when we were speaking to Kate Reynolds around the importance of scope definition, and that whole, like, in a nutshell, Kimberley, that is our, isn't it? That's our investigation. That's our sort of discovery, isn't it? Going out and getting all of that information in relation to the system. And you mentioned again, advocate for the patient. We forget about the patient a lot of times in digital health. Our focus becomes on the system and not on the patient, which is absolutely key in relation to that, and learning from our mistakes. How have you, in your role now that you are this full-time clinical safety officer, if I can sort of concentrate on that patient safety bit for a start, historically, and I still know now that the digital clinical safety function within health organisations predominantly sits under digital, but then it's that big move to get it moved under patient safety. So how are you, whether you've achieved that, or can you just tell us about sort of that journey?
Yeah, so currently patient safety and digital clinical safety sit separately. So I sit within the digital department, which is currently away from the hospital. So we are kind of off-site, but the hospital's just across the bridge. So it doesn't kind of feel off-site in some ways. And our patient safety team basically sit across that bridge and across the road from the hospital still, in another building at this current time for this site. And then at our sister site, the patient safety team sit within the hospital. So we're kind of in some ways a bit disjointed in where we are sat. There are hopes soon that our patient safety team on this site will come and move across into digital, because we've got some free space at this moment in time. But to try and build a relationship together is to try and make sure that actually, if I book a hazard workshop, we have these digital solutions going in, that there's actually a patient safety team representative at those meetings.
Okay.
And also that, they know who I am, that they can come to me if they've got any concerns, or if they're moving anything from a paper format currently, which is our main thing of moving from paper to digital, that then it includes clinical safety. And most recently, what we've been doing is having a monthly meeting with the patient safety team. So again, we have those discussions mostly over lunch, because if you can have a meeting where food is provided, you obviously get a bit more done. And, it leads to those open discussions of that they've come to me of like, oh, what about this system? Because actually this impacts the hospital, but doesn't impact what we're doing with the EPR, but actually how will that look? And it's like, well, for that, we can obviously speak to the digital midwives, because again, they don't sit within the digital department, they sit separately within maternity. And it's just making sure that things are kind of joined up and aligned. So then actually, if they've got a question or if I've got a question, we can easily go to each other, know who each other is. And, our patient safety team have been running on minimum numbers up until recently. There's only been 2 of them for the 2 hospital sites. It's been a mammoth job for them just to try and, put in these meetings to even like reach out, because they're just inundated with their own workload, just as, I am. But now they've got a team of 5. We hope to see that actually our communication improves, that the things that we learn from each other will assist each other. And it's now paving a way for digital safety to end up in our CQAB, so our Clinical Quality Oversight Board, again, which mostly involves patient safety, but taking in our reports and what we found and how we can improve, along with what patients can align better as a trust.
And great sort of like moves in relation to that, sort of like with patient safety and with integrating those teams, because I think it's absolutely paramount. And I would like even put out there that sort of like getting some of those people on sort of like doing the sort of the essentials or the intermediate sort of the NHSE sort of e-learning sort of courses, or putting them on a clinical safety awareness course, because it's like you said, it's everyone's job in relation to that. And interesting you saying about, so you're the only full-time CSO at present, which makes it even more important in relation to building that multidisciplinary team. And what does that look like, and the importance of that. So you've already spoken about that support and the team hazard workshops in relation to making sure you have the right people there. What does that look like for Bedfordshire and sort of your organisation, and how difficult is it for you? Because we know lots of, well, everyone's busy within a trust, within a health organisation. So trying to get sort of like protected time to do these sort of activities is really difficult.
Yeah. So for our project managers, especially, currently what we have in place is a clinical safety checklist. So they have on that checklist literally from pre-project to post-project, step by step, of what it is that is required for clinical digital safety. They are also given the essentials clinical digital safety training to do on ELFH. So they're already then got some pre-knowledge from that course. They then have a one-to-one with myself, and we go through clinical digital safety together. Not everybody takes that on. We have certain members within the digital department that do better at the one-to-ones than others, of making sure that they have a one-to-one, they know who I am and how to contact me, that type of thing. And again, because of the digital world is so big, that also then includes the testing team, the system admin, infrastructure. Within digital, we've got the merge team, digital solutions, EPR. Sat outside of digital is the transformation project manager. So they don't come under digital, but they do digital projects. And then it's then the outreach from there of then, so you've got digital champions, you've got your subject matter experts, the heads of nursing. So a lot of my time of making sure that those people are either able to come to a meeting, sometimes can be quite difficult because everybody has conflicting the things that they need to be working on. Some of our hazard workshops have been known to be quite long. It's not for everybody, is a hazard workshop. So it's choosing those right people. Like most recently, we did a second hazard workshop on one of the items that we're going live with. Our CNIO and our CCIO were both busy. As like, it's not an issue, because actually I've got these people in the room who have built it. I've got these people who are working on it from a clinical digital team aspect. And then I've got the project manager and the training team and testing team in that meeting.
So does that give you some comfort that, like, you sort of reeled off quite a few roles and sort of different people there, which I know from other health organisations, they don't have whether it's, I shouldn't say luxury of that, but they don't have some of these sort of like these titles. They don't have like sort of people there. Some of the projects I've worked on, they're actually scouring around to think, well, I don't have enough people to bring to this hazard workshop, so is it really worth it in that respect? And I suppose it's almost looking at, because we always try and look at, don't we? We look at the negatives of sort of like some of these activities. It's looking at the pros, isn't it? To say, well, actually, if I don't have every single person in that room, it doesn't matter. But I think the really important thing in relation to that is communication, isn't it?
It is.
What are your outputs and what are the actions and what are those recommendations off the back of? Because as we know, the majority of what we do is evidence gathering, and it's a real challenge, I think, for clinical safety officers in respect to, there's always this premise, and it's very onerous on a clinical safety officer, that you're producing the hazard log, you're producing a clinical risk management plan, and you're producing the safety case report. And I would push back on that and challenge to say there are lots of components of all of those documents that can be contributed to by the wider team, and to actually crack that and actually get that in place. So I don't know whether that's something that you do in relation to that, Kimberley.
So within DCB 0160, we have some highlighted sections. So the introduction, the system overview, and testing issues. So normally what we would ask is that the project managers start filling out those highlighted areas basically as soon as we hit the ground running. It's like, you're completing a project initiation document, you're doing the project plan. Actually, that starts to build my information for the CRMP, but also starts then pulling in information for the DCB 0160. So you need to start on those bits, so they'll work away on those. Now, system overview can kind of either be the project manager that fills it out, or the system admin. So we've started asking system admin to provide something called a tech spec document. So again, just tells you how they've built it within the system, because of our EPR is quite configurable for the trust. It means that we can obviously pull things out, put things in, make it do fancy little things that we want it to do. So it's understanding how that's been built and why they've built it that way. We also have business analysts that are doing the as-is to be process maps. And with that comes the gap analysis work as well. So we're going from one system to the next system. We know that system A isn't like system B. We wouldn't expect it to be. So what's missing when we move across? Because then would that create a hazard? Or, we're mitigating that by the changes that we're putting into B, and then by putting in the training module in for that. So that you've got all that going on. Then we're very lucky that we have an IT testing team. So they do a full rigorous testing cycle of anything really that we make or that we're pushing out supplier wise. And then we also have UAT that's done by our users with the support of the clinical digital team and project managers. So we're making sure already that the document that I'm technically responsible for is actually being built up by multiple people in multiple different ways. And I'm then pulling together all that information and putting it into the DCB. to make sure that actually, right, yes, I've got this document, I've got that document, the project manager's written what they've needed to here, we've got the defect log, we know what we're going to do from that. I'm obviously responsible for the hazard log itself as the CSO. And I have one clinical digital team member at the moment that is quite interested in the CSO roles. He has shown an interest. He wants to plough on, which at the moment I'm teaching him what it is that he needs to do, how we do that. So hopefully it just makes things then a bit easier in the future of trying to sign things off, especially as at the moment the people signing off the DCB is that of our CNIO, our CDIO, our medical director for the EPR stuff, and actually need to take some of my the workload away from my CNIO, who's also just as equally as busy, to make sure that then he's got space for me to then just sign off those documents as able.
Yeah, because it's difficult, isn't it, with sort of, you know, C-suite sort of clinical roles. And I've always said I'm not a big advocate for CNIOs, CCIOs, CXIOs. In that respect, being clinical safety officers, I've done lots of talks around that in health organisations because they just don't have protected time to be able to do that. But what I am a big advocate of is you don't find you either have these days sort of clinical safety officers in full-time roles, or people say, oh, it's a part of my job, but you don't see it anywhere within their title. So people don't know that they're clinical safety officers, and people say, oh, well, you don't need to know. But it's just like sort of, you know, it's nice to sort of, you know, to identify with that role, and it gives people sort of like, you know, something to sort of like, you know, so they can identify with that for themselves, not just for other people as well. So the implementation of, so we've got the two standards. We have to mention standards at some point. We're talking about them, aren't we? In sort of, so DCB 0129 and 160. You know, this big world of these two standards. And as we know, things have really moved forward within the past sort of 5 years. We're literally coming up, aren't we, to sort of like, we're in our 5th year of like sort of pre and post COVID and the pandemic, which saw digital health just absolutely sort of like the acceleration within the sector has just been absolutely crazy. And then obviously you have the challenges, and I know you faced those, Kimberley, in sort of, because obviously your transition has obviously come during that time. So it's the adoption of the standards. And I think when a lot of people these days look at the sort of the date on those standards, and at the moment 2018 was the last time they were revised. You know, it's implementing those into sort of like the real world, and how practical that actually is. And from your experiences within your organisation, you know, what are the challenges that you sort of face in relation to the standards themselves?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing sometimes with the standards is that you can interpret them in slightly different ways depending on who you are. And it is quite difficult. They're quite, in some ways, lengthy, trying to pull out the information that is that you require to know what it is that you need to be doing next. I remember doing my digital clinical safety training and still coming away and thinking, I don't know what to do. And that's how I've felt when I read the standards of, what do I do now? Because actually it's all very well and good sometimes having things written down, but if you don't explain it in the correct language that is required for people to understand what they are supposed to do, it does make it much harder. I've had to go to Kay recently to ask the question of, am I correct or am I not? Have I been doing this wrong for the last 2 years and not noted that I'm doing it wrong? And that was all to do around the part of when it comes to doing the reviews on your DCBs. So I've always been under the mindset of that I check these every year, I put in the new date, it's a new version, even if I haven't done any changes. But actually, what I was finding from a supplier is that, no, we've been told that we don't have to change anything or write anything on our DCB unless we've made a major change within the system. And when I went to Kay and she read it, she's like, they could actually, depending on how you read it, decide if they want to or not. And it's like, so do I then need to be doing yearly reviews or not? Like, I'm still going to carry on with them because they're in my to-do list. So that's not an issue. But it's just a case of when we're writing out these policies, procedures, even when we're writing our own, never mind the standards, it's how are they perceived by the person reading them? Because actually they need to be clear and concise. They need not to overface the person that's having to look at these standards to understand what it is that they're doing. We've all been there where we've written or helped write our policies for the trust and be like, but step by step, do I know? Actually, is this too long? And we've been working on our policy now for a while, and I sometimes think I've lost where I'm up to because there is so much information. And that's sometimes how I feel when I look at those standards.
And it's really interesting when sort of like speaking to yourself, speaking to Kay, speaking to other people, and everyone mentions this policy. So it's and I would sort of like, you know, challenge health organisations in respect with my quality management system hat on, sort of as an internal auditor for QMS, is that, you know, it was labelled a clinical risk management system for a reason, because it's a system. And the adoption of, you're absolutely right in respect to what do you do next, where do you go next, and there almost needs to be an adoption of a set of work instructions or processes. And I know a lot of people would push back and say to me, oh, another process. If process is done correctly and in the right manner, and we mentioned before in episode 2, it has to be done by the people, with the people that are doing it. You can't sit in an office, write a policy, and then give it to people and say, there you go. There's a process or there's a policy. If, you know, process has to be written sort of in relation to that. So would you find something like a digital playbook would sort of like help or assist in that sort of respect, where it sort of like, you know, it gives you sort of, you know, some real life sort of advice and guidance with some, you know, with nice infographics. You know, I always say a picture tells 1,000 words, doesn't it? Sort of like, you know, if someone gives you a big verbose document like a standard, I'll go and read that. It's very difficult, isn't it, to try and disseminate and say, right, like you've just said, where do I go now? It's just given me a set of things to do, but it doesn't really give me a clear understanding of sort of like, you know, how I'm supposed to do them, how I'm supposed to apply some of this methodology to the actual scenarios themselves. And dare I say it, that, you know, the NHSE sort of essentials and intermediate training, there is a scenario in sort of each of those, and it doesn't necessarily give a good appreciation of the sort of the standards and what they're trying to achieve in relation to that. But would you see something like that would help in that situation?
Yeah. So from a point of view, depending on where you're looking at CSO. So from a project manager point of view, the essentials of clinical digital safety has been quite helpful for them from not being clinical people. Whereas from the member from our clinical digital team that is interested in clinical safety, works as a pharmacy technician. So again, some level of understanding, but it's different from that as a nurse. And this is where sometimes a playbook, depending on your speciality of what you've done, is quite helpful. And like my colleague has asked, would I mind writing him a checklist for what needs to be done in a yearly review? What needs doing from a beginning to end project? What needs doing in a decommission? Because actually, he knows that from his understanding, he needs it to be laid out in a way that he can easily go, right, so I start here, I go to this next link, I go here, I add this in to the DCB, and then I need to send it to Kim to make sure that then she's had sight of it, to then make sure that then we can get it signed off. So he's got that process then of exactly what it is that he needs to do. And that's what's helping him on his journey know that, and right at the beginning, he had his training in January. So we're 7 months in now where he's still on his first safety case, because that's how long this project has taken. And he's lost that confidence that he would have had from day one in that training to now. So having a playbook that someone can go back to and be like, oh yeah, a bit like the matron's handbook that we have for nursing as well. I think having a CSO handbook of where, right, I'm on this bit, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, actually, this is what I need to apply. Oh, and this is my competency as well for this section would be amazing.
Absolutely, and you've hit the nail on the head there, and that's great around that competency side of things as well, because a digital playbook could really sort of support that process and around sort of competency, and that brings us quite nicely onto sort of there's digital maturity at the moment within our workforce is what I'd like, want to concentrate on and have a chat about now. And in respect to clinical safety awareness as well, something that I think we all know is lacking across our workforce. If I was to randomly walk into a trust and ask to speak to a set of clinicians and ask them about the safety standards, I guarantee you the responses would be very varied across those. And it would probably point to if someone had been involved with a project within the actual project itself, within the digital health project, and was exposed to the standards and hazard logs, they would be able to give you somewhat of an answer. Whereas everybody else within the trust probably wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about in respect to that. Now, it's, I'd like to explore the benefits, and I've sort of raised this, and sort of, as you know, I sit on the leadership committee for clinical safety through the BCS as a fellow, and something we want to push forward. Something we also spoke about at the in-person CSO coffee and chat as well is about the introduction of core competencies within our professions, and what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, I think from a nursing aspect, we start off with competencies right from the word go, whether that's ANTT all the way through to can you put that cannula in and give an IV medication. So for us, it wouldn't be a hindrance. Actually, it would be a help. It would then help us in some ways with our confidence of teaching our peers back in saying, actually, I have been signed off on this part of this and I can teach you. And then you get that train the trainer mentality that you would of any new starter that comes into the trust and you're buddied up with. And I just think there needs to be more work and understanding of how does that fit into what it is that we're doing as CSOs, but how does that fit in for our staff in the ward areas and clinical site? One of the things that we have here are patient safety summits that are held by the trust. And I have asked for the next one that does happen, that I attend that from a digital clinical safety point of view. So anyone that would come to a patient safety summit then also hears about clinical digital safety. And then we start to open up those conversations. Quite lucky that I also do some of the floor walking when we do go live. So when it, they look at your badge and they're like, oh, what's a CSO?
What's one of those?
Yeah, and it starts to open up that conversation of, well, this is what it is that I do. I'm making sure that actually this is safe before it goes in. If you do have concerns, make sure that you fill out an incident report. I check them every day. We have a huddle, and we learn from what happens with those systems to make sure, is it a system issue? Is it a human issue? Is there something else that's going on, like integration, that's just not working between the two? So then when we report back on that within our digital risk meeting monthly, we've already highlighting what needs to be worked on and how do we make sure that that is mitigated in the future.
No, that's great, and I think those initiatives, that you just spoke about, and those sort of those events that have been sort of like organised. It was like the paper picnic that we had at Barkinghaven and Redbridge the other week. It was absolutely fascinating and an eye opener for me that an average trust uses 5 million pieces of paper a month. I was just taken aback. It was just absolutely crazy. And this is all part of our digital program, isn't it? And it was just so nice to have a clinical safety station there and have quite a big footfall in the end coming over and sort of, clinical safety, what do you do? What is it you do? And I take great pleasure in telling people that what it is that we actually do. We're here to, we're here to make a difference, and we're here to make sure that we reduce the risk of harm to the patient. And when you tell that to people, they're like, sort of, oh, right, how do you do that within digital? And when you explain to them, they're sort of almost like this light bulb moment of, oh, right, yeah, that does bring me into this, and I am responsible. And it's like, yes, you are responsible. We're all, like you said, coming back to the start, why clinical safety is everyone's job in relation to that. And I put the question out to everyone sort of like listening that, how hard is it going to be for us to mandate clinical risk management training in some form within, within our core training as nurses, as doctors, as AHPs, as as pharmacists, pharmacy technicians. I've been advised that you need to tackle that at the university, at those sort of institutes, to get it on the core curriculum in that sort of respect. But then also, we need to go to the NMC, GMC, HCPC, and actually sort of communicate that that's what's going to needs to happen as well, because we need support from everybody, NHS England as well, to be involved to make that sort of happen. Looking at everything that we've spoken about in some of those questions, and I do want to come on to now sort of like it's all around that culture, isn't it? The safety culture within an organisation, and I know we see all of these sort of I read so many risk management policies around risk appetite and risk tolerance and everything around that, but it's very heavily focused on corporate, financial, reputational, etc. And even to the point where, shockingly, in one risk management policy, actual patient safety took a back seat within that policy, and which is a real shame to think that. And I don't think it was intentional. I just think that nobody really. It was like we spoke about before, Kimberley. It's just a policy, and someone had just, it just been sort of like someone's in that autonomic sort of robotic mode, just sort of just writing it out because they've been asked to, and hasn't involved the people. But I suppose how do we sort of improve safety culture, or how would you improve safety culture within your organisation? And the difficult part, I think, in that is how do we measure that in respect to improvement?
Yeah. Like with policies are only as good as what you're actioning that's written within them. It's okay writing a policy, but actually if you cannot action it, it means nothing. And from the policy that we've been writing recently is we're not to that level yet, but this is what we want to do. So we're already thinking about the future of, we know that we're at this level now and we want to work up to this level, but we need to meet somewhere in the middle and be like, right, we know patient safety is our priority, but how do we make it everybody else's priority? So that of the service desk, that of the project managers, that of the volunteers that come through the door. Because at the end of the day, no matter who you are, you're going to come across barriers. Somebody will divulge information to you that you would think, oh no, like, I can't have that happen. And especially when you work clinically and you're there on the shop floor, and we've seen it many a times of where, oh no, I've forgotten to give that patient a glass of water. Oh no, I've gone home and I've got the CD keys on me, those types of things. And you're like rushing back because your mentality is that, well, what about the patient? What is happening there? Yeah. And that's how we need other people around us to think as well, no matter what it is that we're delivering out. And in some ways, there needs to also be that onus on the supplier coming in. Not every trust is the same. Everywhere will be slightly different. So how is it that your product maintains that safety when changes then come in? We as a team work very closely with cybersecurity and information governance as well. And we call ourselves the 3 pillars. And without those 3 pillars sign off, you don't go any further, basically. So we're like the gatekeepers for safety. We all look at our pillar in a different way. Information governance is looking at the information that's shared across from patient to patient, supplier to patient, the hospital to the community. Cybersecurity is making sure that we're not being hacked on a daily basis, or that you're not sharing a password to input some type of information. And I'm looking then at the other side of the patient safety aspect of, is this system safe? Which complements that of the patient safety team, who are already looking at the instances that happen. But it's not just them. It's then the falls team. It's the tissue viability team. We all have under our umbrella patient safety. It's making sure that actually we have that awareness and what information they're passing on, because at different levels, we'll all have that patient and carer and staff member interaction. So actually, if you're already putting out there to the patient of, I'm on this device for this reason, and this is what it is that I'm doing, and that then feeds down to the carer of, oh, actually, they're doing this, that, and the other. A bit like when we had the whole debate about sharing of information and how that kind of imploded in itself because patients weren't happy actually to have data shared because they felt that that would put their data at risk. And health data for anybody is very personal, and it needs to be looked after and protected. And I think getting that message out from that very beginning of, imagine if this was you, imagine if this was your family member, what is it that you would do? Right. So how does that then correlate back to us for what we should do?
Yeah, and I think you've sort of, touched on there around transparency, isn't there? Sort of, in relation to that, which there's a fine line, isn't there, about actually communicating what you're actually doing, which we don't do very well within health organisations. Like you say, with carers, with patients, and that all comes back to sort of like patient safety. I think if we improved communication within healthcare organisations, that would improve patient safety tenfold. It's one of the biggest things that we're bad at, because we're large organisations, aren't we? With lots of people doing lots of different roles within that organisation, and it's hard sometimes. in relation to that. You've had a real sort of journey in relation to sort of like, you know, your experience as a clinical safety officer, which has led you to the point of having the opportunity to judge. You've told me at the Health Tech Network Awards. It would be really good to sort of just get sort of your sort of view on how that's been as an experience, because that must be being on that side of the fence and now being involved in digital health projects, and then all of a sudden being asked, quite an honour, I suppose, to be sort of asked to sort of do this, but then sort of you get to get underneath the bonnet then, Kimberley, and actually have a look at some of these applications, and it'd be good to get sort of like, you know, your experience with that.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough from the application that I put in to be selected to be judge for the HTN Awards. We've just recently got the judges pack and the scoring cards. It says as soon as you open it, you're like, oh, that is a lot of information, a lot of awards like going on, and it's just like, oh, just as many as you can, obviously, feedback on, and let us know first, second, and third. Give us a bit of feedback. But what I have found quite interesting in starting the journey and looking through that information pack is how suppliers and trusts, and, you know, because it's not just about the suppliers and what it is that they're feeding in, but it's also what trusts and people have done to actually build, process, roll out, to be able to, in some ways, change the landscape of what it is that they're currently doing. The one thing I had noticed is that people are very good at saying, this is what my system does, this is what this tool does, and actually this is the improvement, and you could save this much money, and, you know, it had no patient harm, that kind of thing. But what is lacking is that data aspect, and also what's happening in the back end of that system. So yes, it's all very well and nice that we're saying, oh, my system can cut your costs, it'll cut bed stays, it will improve patient satisfaction, but there's nothing about clinical digital safety aspects. So we put in about saying, this system does this, this is how it does it. So how does it do that? I need to know why does it do this? What is your evidence for that? And then there was one that wrote in about a DCB 139. I was like, but no. And you've got to be thinking to yourself of, I, as a clinical digital safety officer, want to know how this product is safe. And I'm sure that's how patient safety would view it also, is how is that product safe? Because actually, yes, if it decreases the amount of time I'm manually having to enter data into a system, time and cost, yes, is very big. But actually, who's reviewing that data? Who's making that final decision on that result that it's given you? And, you know, as a clinical digital safety officer, the other thing of like coming into these awards is these people might cross my desk at some point. So actually it is sometimes in my best interest to know what's going on out and around me.
Yeah.
So then when that does hit my desk and we take them on maybe as a supplier in the future, it rings a bell already of, oh yes, I do know that company. This is what it is that they do. And now I can go find out more information. Whereas currently a lot of my time is spent of, we want to go live with this. And I go, but what is it? And I get no answer. And then I'm like, Googling away of like, well, it could be this. Is this what it does?
It's really interesting you saying that, and it must be great. I'd love to sort of like, you know, be a fly on the wall, being sort of like judging and looking at some of these papers and seeing that sort of judging and scoring pack. But everything you've just alluded to around sort of like, you know, lots of people saying my system does this, my system does that. They reel off, you know, a big list of benefits for the system. But like you said, it sort of well, how does it do that? Why does it do that? And importantly, what's the need that you are satisfying within this organisation? It's sort of, I've challenged sort of organisations, manufacturers before, when I was on the other side of the fence, and said, okay, that's brilliant, you've shown me all of this, but what is it actually doing for us? So what does it? I have a need. How do you fulfil that need in relation to effective and safe patient care in relation to your system?
Yeah, it's that investigator part of you that just comes out of like, I want to know this, this, and this, and like, how are you going to give me that?
Totally. And lots of times you just get this blank sort of look, or they start going, it's because they haven't thought about it. It's like, what are the real benefits from the system? Not just those sort of like, the airy fairy ones that sort of everybody writes and we see day in, day out. Tell me how this system's going to make a difference, and it's going to make improvements in what we're doing in relation to the patient.
Yeah, it's like the patients that will ask you questions, like I'm doing medication rounds of like, well, what is this medication? What does it do? It's exactly the same process. You're having to, in some ways, remove yourself from that supplier jargon of, don't just tell me this is what it is that it does. I need to know, why does it do that? Why am I now going to have less swelling in my ankles, let's say? And how do we know that that works? Because actually, if you can't give me that evidence, then you'll have patients say, well, I'm not taking that medication. It's exactly the same in that we're wanting to see an improvement, and I need to know why that would be an improvement.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're not interested.
Yeah, we're not interested, and I'll just put my feet back up on the stool.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'll just apply rice, and that will be
fix
that
everything.
will be it. Yeah, absolutely. So, Kimberley, thank you ever so much for your time. But I'd just like to sort of, if there's one takeaway for anyone listening in what we've sort of like discussed, putting you on the spot now. If there's sort of one takeaway, what would that be for sort of like everyone listening in relation to sort of like, digital clinical safety and the application within their organisations?
So for myself, it would always be, never be afraid to say no. If you're not happy with what is happening, question it. Question, why is that happening? Why do they believe that? What is their proof that they can bring forward? Make sure that in some ways that if you are on your own, use a team around you to find out those questions so then they can bring them back to you. Because not only does it give you a greater understanding, but it also helps your team to know why it is that they're doing the job that they're doing.
No, that's great, and it sort of brings home that sort of, I know for sort of my perspective, safety in numbers is that sort of, it is a team effort. It's not just a one-person job. It may seem like you've got a mountain to climb sometimes, but hopefully, we've all got the support out there. And if people do need, to lean on or need to get advice and guidance, that they can reach out to, the forums that are out there to get that support. Kimberley, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time taken for episode 3 of The Only Way is Ethics. And it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.